Xenoblade Chronicles X, the sixth installment in the storied Xeno series and spiritual successor to Xenoblade Chronicles, is a game that breaks traditional Japanese role-playing game conventions and seamlessly world builds and expands upon its core themes through environmental storytelling, side quest, music, economy, and the very act of exploring itself. Before the likes of Final Fantasy XV, Metal Gear Solid 5, Nier Automata, and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild came to release with their massive open worlds, Xenoblade Chronicles X developer Monolith Soft spearheaded the charge toward crafting humongous Japanese open world games with the power of HD consoles, and arguably remain undefeated to this day in terms of the quality of their world design, even when going up against Western open world juggernauts like Rockstar and Bethesda. And the fact that it's able to stack up favorably against all these games is for a couple of reasons. One of them being that the overworld, the planet Mira, is a consistent and constant focus in the game. So much so that the executive director Tetsuya Takahashi stated that the design focus for this game was on map exploration and character builds during battle. This is to say that unlike most JRPGs where the world is by and large just there to get you to the next story beat, or get you from point A to B with maybe some minor deviations from the main path on the way there, Xenoblade Chronicles X lets players loose on all of its world from the get-go. And I'm not playing around here, I actually do mean all of it. There's no thresholds that the player for some reason can't go beyond, no structure that's insurmountable, and most important of all, no invisible walls. Well, besides on the very edges of the world, but everything within the confines of the map is accessible. An ambitious scope of this magnitude was no doubt brought about by Monolith Soft's determination to make every location within sight actually be someplace the player can go. In truth, according to director Kojima, this is actually the goal when creating Xenoblade Chronicles X's critically acclaimed predecessor Xenoblade Chronicles, stating that when we developed Xenoblade Chronicles, we actually wanted to make it so players could go to any location displayed on the screen, but unfortunately there were places that were impossible to get to. Director Kojima also stated that we didn't want to disappoint players with something simple when they put in the effort to go to hard to reach locations, so there is a lot of content hidden in various locations. And this brings me to my next point on how Xenoblade Chronicles X breaks JRPG conventions with its world. Where many JRPGs tend to have one or two optional potentially hidden areas, Xenoblade Chronicles X has such optional areas littered in droves all over the planet Mira. Even after playing for more than 80 hours, there was still more to explore, hidden caves yet to be seen, enemy bases to conquer, and stunning landmarks that are right under my nose the whole time. This sense of constant discovery and exploration is driven home by expanding the game world through verticality. You see, many open world games seek to increase the content they can put into their worlds with each consecutive release by merely expanding the square miles of their worlds to fit their needs. And while there isn't inherently anything wrong with this idea on paper, it often leads to games that feel almost too big, where every square inch of the landscape doesn't necessarily feel like it needs to be there to fulfill the game's vision, and content is spread thinly to meet the need of filling up the space with activity. Xenoblade Chronicles X's hexagon-segmented world map and rather compact world eliminates this problem by making sure meaningful content is in every section of the game. You can explore and look at the map and see that an area that seemed to not have a lot going on there actually does have significance in some way, whether that be for a side quest, a hidden landmark on the inside of a mountain, or one of the game's many unique tyrant enemies that have special abilities which make them more challenging to fight as opposed to a standard enemy mob. Anyhow, going back to the idea I was talking about earlier about how this game expands its world through verticality, instead of focusing on horizontality like most games of this type tend to, in Xenoblade Chronicles X there's just a massive amount to see in this game if you search upwards. An example of this would be in one of Mira's diverse continents, Noctilum, where it's possible to run up winding tree oaks and jump across gaps, as well as walk on suspension bridges and floor formations. And it doesn't stop there, due to how everything the player can see is actually someplace they can go. So for instance, if you think there should be something of note at the very top of that ring in the distance in the continent of Oblivia, then there actually is something of note on the top of that ring in the distance in the continent of Oblivia. If you think there should be something neat on the top of Blade Tower in New LA, then there actually is something neat on the top of Blade Tower in New LA. In fact, there actually happens to be a side quest up there, a great reward for the player's curiosity. Which swiftly brings me to my next point on how JRPG conventions are broken with this game. Xenoblade Chronicles X has a heavy focus on side quests and optional activities like affinity missions. In a statement from director Genki Yokota, he said, "During the first stages of planning, we discussed increasing the number of quests by 3,000%. However, this took place before the development process, so in the end, we ended up creating a similar number of quests as in the previous game, but we did put 3,000% of our hearts into creating them." Which is to say that, unlike the previous game, Xenoblade Chronicles, which had around 400 side quests that were often very tedious to do if you sought to complete them directly, and tended to contain only a monetary reward and experience points rather than a satisfying small narrative arc, Xenoblade Chronicles X's side quests are leagues above many JRPGs. And the reason for this is because of the sheer quantity and quality of the side quests are actually interesting to see through to the end. While you still have your fetch quests, which require you to obtain random materials, and your bounty hunts which tell you to kill a specific number of an enemy, you have around 195 normal missions which usually aren't as basic as the previous type of quest, till actual stories that expand the player's knowledge of the world, allow the player to make choices that actually affect the outcome of the quest, encourage exploration of locations the player might not have known about, and test the player's understanding of the game's many mechanics as well as their knowledge of the world. There is also affinity missions for the numerous potential party members in the game, which serves as a way to flesh out their characters and works with varying success for each of the 18 characters. Naturally, all this quote-unquote side content doesn't excuse for the game's supremely lackluster main story, rather than bare-bones character interactions within the main story, the seeming irrelevance of the numerous minor recruitable party members in the main story, and your customizable playable character's lack of input whatsoever in the main story. But there is a reason Xenoblade Chronicles X is able to suffer these heavy strikes against it and still come out of it a fantastic game: its gameplay systems, specifically in how it deals with its economy and battle system. All of the game's many systems are masterfully interwoven, which is to say that the player's potential effectiveness in battle is directly linked to how they manage the in-game economies and vice versa. But to get into the nitty-gritty of what I mean by this statement, I need to talk about some of the currencies this game utilizes and the battle system. So let's start with the economy first. Xenoblade Chronicles X has 3 central currencies: credits, which are the standard form of money which can be used to buy gear and skells; uranium, an extremely valuable material central to crafting that can be mined by planting data probes in strategic locations to maximize the amount you can get; and reward tickets, a rare form of currency which are obtained via online activities and allow easy purchase of all materials in the game that can be used to craft, provided you have enough of them. And now onto the battle system, which is pretty complicated, and I will be speaking about it in rather broad terms because it would take a while to go more in depth, and I don't necessarily need to explain all of its intricacies to get my point across. Anyway, like its predecessor, Xenoblade Chronicles X features a real-time action battle system in which commands, called arts, are issued, and once they are issued, there is a cooldown period before they can be used again. Tension points and their skull equivalents, gear points, are obtained primarily by auto-attacking. Once the amount of tension points a character has reaches 3000, an overdrive can be triggered, which is basically a temporary state, or perhaps a not so temporary state if you're skilled, where the damage output you give to enemies can be up substantially. Soul voices are another mechanic that activate under certain combat conditions, and once activated, players can trigger an ally to heal them or buff them. This system removes the player's ability to heal with consumable items and instead assigns the ability to heal primarily to soul voices. This was done to alleviate a problem of being stuck in the role of a healer for an entire battle, and allowed the player to be more proactive in attack without having to constantly deal with the idea of stopping your attack to heal. Skells, the rideable mechs I've been referring to throughout the duration of this video, are greatly empowering but mustn't be abused, not only because of the heavy penalty for their destruction in battle, but also because of their limited fuel. There's also quite a bit more I could have elaborated on, and some mechanics I didn't touch, but for the sake of time I'll move on to my explanation of how these mechanics are masterfully interwoven, and how your success in battles will not only tie to your understanding of the battle system, but also in your understanding of how the game's economy is linked with the battle system. For example, let's say the player has just encountered an enemy that they can't beat with their current equipment, so they head to New LA to buy a new skull using credits. Wonderful, they think they're ready to tackle a powerful foe, but on their way there they get a little overzealous and break their skull numerous times, picking fights they can't win, using up their skull insurance and forcing them to return to New LA to figure out what they want to do with their newly wrecked skull. The player decides to pay for the repairs using credits and forks down about 70% of what they paid for the skull in the first place to get it fixed. Ouch! So with hurt pride, they get back into their skull and attempt to head straight for the beast, only to be stopped about a quarter of the way there because they forgot to refuel their skull after they wasted it in battles prior to it breaking. So with head held low, the player walks back to New LA Blade Barracks to refuel their skull. But unfortunately they aren't able to refuel it much due to how little Moranium they have. And the reason they have so little Moranium is because of how few data probes they have planted to mine Moranium, and how the data probes they have planted aren't best positioned to give them a lot of Moranium and other resources. So the player explores and plants some data probes and makes sure they're set up in a way to get themselves a decent amount of Moranium. After that, they refuel their skull with Moranium and are on their way to fight the tough Indigene with reinvigorated vitality. They get crushed, thankfully aborting their skull before it was wrecked, thus saving them from paying another hefty fee. So to circumvent this seemingly insurmountable foe, they start buying better gear with credits and start using reward tickets they've accumulated over time to get the materials needed to enhance that gear further. And once the materials they need have been procured, they use Moranium to get augments, which provide benefits to gear, as well as augment slots to hold an abundance of augments. And then they get back to fight once more and win. Yay. So yeah, as you can see, there are a lot of mechanics here, and they feed and rely on one another heavily. Granted, the scenario depicted just now probably wouldn't occur to such disastrous effects at that stage of the game where the player probably at least has some semblance of how some of these mechanics interweave, but I'm pretty sure it does a good job showing you how deep and interconnected these systems are, the huge amount of customizability that the player has free reign of, and the careful decision making required when spending hard-earned resources and cash. Though I will admit that Xenoblade Chronicles X doesn't do a great job explaining all of its systems in the actual game. While it doesn't unload all the mechanics I talked about previously from the start, the way it gradually presents them as you progress through the game with a little time to properly get acclimated to them is pretty poor. You'll probably have to do a lot of reading of the manual and get help from numerous external sources to truly get a grasp on a lot of the mechanics here and how they interweave with one another. Personally speaking, I struggled a lot with these mechanics until around the 70 to 80 hour mark, which is when I really started to do some research on how these systems work, and started to seek help from a friend of mine who sunk more than 200 hours into this monster of a game. It certainly takes some perseverance to learn this game, but once you do, you quickly realize how richly rewarding and immensely empowering these mechanics are for players. The sheer amount of power and control you have over creating a character build tailor-made for your playstyle is awesome, and really speaks to the quality of work of Monolith Soft, especially when you consider how they said that they focus on designing a game around character builds in addition to ambitious exploration aspects. You see, unlike most JRPGs and even its predecessor Xenoblade Chronicles, the meat of Xenoblade Chronicles X isn't found in the main story, but rather in its fleshed out side activities, exploration, and intricate gameplay systems. It's one of the few JRPGs that is able to sustain itself and compel the player for hundreds of hours using its gameplay first and foremost rather than its story, which in my opinion is of the utmost importance for a video game. For example, while I'll forever love Xenogears for its amazing story, world, and characters, I'll never be able to love it for its super weak battle system which you spend most of your time in the game with, and the unfortunate reality that most fights can be won with the exact same strategy for the entire game. But anyway, moving on from the topic of JRPG conventions, I still have loads to unpack here in regards to how this wonderful game seamlessly world builds and expands upon its core themes through environmental storytelling, side quests, and the very act of exploring itself. The planet Mira is rife with a history if you go out and look for it. Ruins litter the continents of Primordia, Oblivia, and Kaljos, leaving room for those curious about them to speculate and come up with theories. And in typical Monolith Soft fashion, the history of the world appears to be very well thought out, with many of the ruins in Primordia and Oblivia seemingly coming from an extinct ancient civilization that used to exist in the skies of Mira before plummeting to the ground after losing control of the energy that kept them afloat, according to snippets of dialogue from Nopons and item descriptions from items found in those continents. Even the weird things that you think would be purely video game nonsense have an explanation, like how the floating islands that later parts of Primordia and Oblivia aren't just there for no reason. The reason they float is because they're remnants of the huge kingdom that used to exist in the sky that I was talking about earlier. The giant rings that are scattered across the lands of Oblivia are also thought to potentially be a weapon that fell from the kingdom in the sky, which would not only explain why the rings are buried in Oblivia, but why there's a huge bottomless pit in Oblivia that seems to have been artificially created by a weapon of mass destruction, or the kingdom in the sky's impact on the ground as it fell. And in the continent of Kaljos, which is described by NPCs as a battleground, we see numerous ruins of another ancient civilization, including an intact large castle that can be explored rather thoroughly. There's also the mining frigates above the ruined city, which are in a rather different style from the rest of the architecture in Kaljos and also seem to suggest another civilization extracted the land of Kaljos for its resources after the civilization in Kaljos fell, further explaining why there would be such a hazardous mining facility over a city and why lava covers Kaljos. And if you notice the similarities between all these extinct ancient civilizations, you'll probably find that the details regarding the fall of these civilizations all come back and tie back into some of the Xenoblade Chronicles X's core themes, such as survival in the face of extinction. To give some context, in the universe of Xenoblade Chronicles X, humanity is on the brink of extinction after being caught in the crossfire of a war between two alien races, with Earth being destroyed as a result of the war and the remnants of humanity being forced to flee to the distant planet of Mira and build new LA to preserve the survival of the human race. The idea of all these ancient civilizations going extinct as they struggle to survive strengthens the themes of survival and extinction already at play, and lends a feeling of desperation to the whole game. And these are only just some of the theories and ruins in the game that I just talked about. There's plenty more for those daring enough to explore Mira to its fullest. All the hints the game gives regarding Mira's history is just vague enough, yet clearly well thought out enough to encourage players who love lore in their game world to seek out answers for themselves, not unlike the world of Team Ico games like The Last Guardian, which I talked about in a previous video. Side quests are another aspect that Xenoblade Chronicles X uses to world build and expand upon its themes. As I've stated earlier, side quests and optional content make up the bulk of this game, and the stories that the side quests tell world build and harken back to themes central to the Xeno games. While the player progresses through the game, they meet and interact with various different alien races, each with their own cultures, mannerisms, and history. The relationships the player forms with these different alien races, such as the Nopon, Orpheans, Rothians, Manon, Prone, and Zarubagans, ends up being a central focus of side quest. Whether that be helping a Rothian woman find a new purpose in life by suggesting she assist in public relations work, helping a Manon uncover the mystery behind a series of xenophobic murders against their kind, assisting in the unprecedented marriage of a human and a Prone, helping two Nopon brothers in a quest for a legendary sword, helping a Zarubagan understand human emotions, or even aiding a scientist from the future in the creation of a very Back to the Future-esque car-based time machine. And those are only just a couple of the side quests. I didn't even get into the religious cult quest, or the quest inspired by the Alien movies, or even the Blood Lobster quest where a madman plants explosive plush toy lobsters all throughout New LA. Through the side quest, the player gains a great understanding of the world and its inhabitants, through information that is slowly drip-feeded over time. And because of the natural world building and characterization at work here, the game is even able to test your knowledge of Mira and its people in its quest. Later into the game, as you come to know the people of Mira well and are asked to help them interact with one another in some quest, You'll often be given a choice when giving advice to an NPC on what to say or how to approach a certain group on Mira. For example, as you play through the game, you learn that the Rothians are a proud warrior people that dislike cowards and show respect to those that best them in combat. Keeping this in mind when interacting with them or helping others interact with them will yield better results for you in the long run. You see, all these optional pieces of lore and world building you gain from optional activities make the side quests themselves substantially more important to the game as a whole. And this was clearly the intention, because in an interview with Yuichiro Takara, the scriptwriter for Xenoblade Chronicles X, he stated, "When I think about traditional RPGs, there's this main storyline that includes everything there is about the characters and drama. Key information was almost never found outside the main story. But when I played the previous Xenoblade game, I was surprised by how the characters and game world were richly portrayed outside the story part that I wrote. I realized that with this game, the main scenario is only a small part of the whole game. So for this game, I felt that the main story shouldn't be the only place where you could find out about everything. By creating a story with room for expansion, I thought the people at Monolith Soft could pick up from where I intentionally left off." End quote. But world building isn't something that can merely be added to a game. It takes time, and executive director Tetsuya Takahashi clearly understood this, stating that world building is something that's really important to me in creating games, and it's something that on the player side takes some time. In order for you to feel like you're almost living in this world, you have to spend some 20 to 30 hours there. If immersion and a deep sense of detail in the world is my goal, then I need to use a design that will allow people to spend that much time in it, because it's an essential element. When I say it takes perhaps somewhere about 30 hours to feel like you're actually immersed in a role and living there, what keeps people coming back to these games is that they want to live in roles like these in games. You see, Takahashi uses the side quest design structure, something that the player will inevitably be interacting with for hours upon hours as they play, to help slowly ingratiate the player into his world. Xenoblade Chronicles X, through its side quests, is able to expand heavily upon the foundation of its world, characters, and lore, as well as add value to an aspect of RPGs that are typically viewed as filler between the good bits in most other games. In addition to the stuff I previously mentioned, the side quests also all tie in deeply with Xenoblade Chronicles X's core themes. To elaborate on this claim further, I'll need to bring up another quote from director Genki Yokota, where he talks about the meaning of the X in the game's title, Xenoblade Chronicles X, beyond simply standing as a symbol for alien life and exploration of the unknown. Quote, "In the Japanese version, we refer to the X as cross, as in a place that can serve as a crossroad where people can come across one another unexpectedly." End quote. All of Xenoblade Chronicles X exemplifies this idea of crossroads Yokota talked about, but the side quests in particular highlight this exceptionally well. Every action the player takes in side quests requires them to negotiate with new people, human and alien alike, after crossing paths with them somewhere, and through this process helps the various different races gain understanding of one another or simply aid them in a crisis. It very much so represents the theme of hope in the face of despair and the theme of uniting disparate groups of people to not only survive, but thrive. But anyway, moving on from the topic of side quests to speak more broadly about the subject of the game's themes, I wish to bring up an interesting quote from the 2017 E3 Nintendo Treehouse stream of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, where the primary creative force behind the Xeno series, Tetsuya Takahashi, states the word Xeno means something different or not familiar, and I think in life when we're living there's unique different people and they have different personalities, different backgrounds. And it's the interaction between those people that create the drama of life, and I thought it'd be great if I could drop that drama into video games. And that's why I add Xeno to a lot of my games. And when you really sit down and think about it, it's completely true. All of the Xeno games incorporate this theme of people of all different kinds coming together to oppose an antagonistic force and survive in dire situations. It's even seen as far back as the first title in the series, Xenogears. Granted, this isn't new territory for RPGs to tread, JRPGs especially, but the sheer amount of effort that Xenoblade Chronicles X puts into this idea of crossroads in every aspect of its narrative and structure goes above and beyond prior Xeno titles and most other games in general. In fact, humanity's central hub on Mira, New LA, demonstrates this perfectly. For example, as the player progresses through the game and meets new alien races, the city at the start that only contains human survivors from the destruction of Earth slowly becomes a bustling and vibrant home where aliens and humankind coexist and help one another. The player visibly sees how the city of New LA develops and changes as they see different people groups hanging out leisurely on the streets, different people groups working together on the construction of the city, and an alien race leave their large traversable spaceship hovering above the city. New LA itself is literally one big crossroad, an intersection where vastly different people from all around the universe meet. And acts as a place where a new hope is born. A hope born from people understanding one another, despite their differences, and using the bonds formed from that understanding to form a new, brighter, and better future. It's a really powerful message that I personally love, and although the game sometimes stumbles in getting this message across, I still think it does a wonderful job despite some issues. Anyway, swiftly moving on to the topic of Xenoblade Chronicles X's music, the music in the game is also used as a tool to tie back into the world building themes in the game, particularly the vocal tracks in this case. An example of this would be the game's battle theme, Black Tar.
On a different planet, a lot more than we can manage, but we gotta keep on standing. Just wanna live in peace, yeah. Black Tar's gonna keep us restless, running just to own our own breath. Just wanna live in peace, yeah. Black Tar's gonna keep us restless, running just to keep our own breath. People are dripping black tar is taking a ship down so far. Don't wanna lose hope, but here we are. Wishing to see the sun rise, but the sun doesn't rise in this sky. Black tar covers most eyes.
As you can see, it ties in with the themes of survival, desperation, and hope rather nicely, considering how humanity is fighting on uncharted territory. It also provides hints relating to the lore of the game world when speaking about how they just want to live in peace, yet black tar's gonna keep them restless, and how they're just running to own their own breaths. With black tar representing antimatter, the stuff that the ghosts use. And if you're not familiar with the ghosts, they're the mysterious alien faction that played a hand in the destruction of Earth and humanity's crash landing on Mira, but don't appear elsewhere in the game. You see, lyrics elsewhere in the song directly mention the ghosts, and these lyrics I just presented seem to imply they can take over humans with antimatter, as shown by them running just to own their own breaths. It even seemingly references the ghost attack on humanity's spaceship, the White Whale, which resulted in them crash landing on Mira when it says people are dripping black tar and it's taken down a ship so far. In another of the game's battle themes, called In the Forest, we see the usage of lyrics to convey story elements and themes as well. The first part where it says she was standing there in the hangar, the hatch was open then, there was no one there, he was drifting along in the universe, that was the last time I saw his face, is actually referencing the backstory of the game. Particularly the central character Elma's close relationship to the missing hero that piloted the tandem scale Ares with her and saved the White Whale from destruction by the ghost. This young unknown hero is exactly what these lyrics are referencing. Not much is stated about this young man that saved the White Whale from destruction in the game despite him being important to many key characters in the game, but the short stories created for this game before its release state that while Elma and him are defending the White Whale from the ghost, their skull is blown outside the ship, but right before that happens the hero pushes her out of the skull's hatch to save her life, sacrificing himself and drifting in space much like the lyrics previously mentioned imply. The second part of this song hammers home the themes of survival, hope, and camaraderie that I've been talking about through this video, as shown by how it says they're now fighting hard in common land, and there's a chance they found their wonderland. And lastly, in the song Melancholia, the ever-growing despair and weariness from the daily grind to survive on Mira is mentioned.
Always look up to the sky, is this what I'm living for? How can I spin this world better? Every place I used to live, all the news we used to hear, all the things we heard from you are almost making fun of me. Every day we work so hard, everything will never change. Everything will never change. Everything.
Admittedly, some of this stuff is a wee bit cheesy, and there's a lot of broken English in there, but the effort put forth to make sure it all ties in with the game is commendable. And even outside the songs with lyrics, the soundtrack composed by renowned anime composer Hiroyuki Sawano does a really good job of creating a suitable atmosphere for the science fiction space opera that is Xenoblade Chronicles X. Anyhow, pressing onward to the topic of Xenoblade Chronicles X's economy, which I elaborated a bit on earlier when I talked about the game's interweaving systems, Xenoblade Chronicles X's economy is great and helps to ingratiate the player into the world of Mira as well as subtly tie back into the game's themes. First off, you actually have to work to amass funds. There's no real get-rich-quick scheme to easily get better stuff. It all takes time. Players who put in the effort to learn the game's systems and apply their skills will be rewarded by having an easier time in getting funds, but as with any good game economy, purchasing decisions are still something to be carefully considered, especially since funds take some time to amass. An example of this would be the first skull you get many hours into the game. Well, not the first skull you get. The first skull you get is free and is pretty weak, but I'm referring to the first skull you buy for yourself with your own pocket change. The one you buy for yourself is the real bad boy with some actual power, the one you've been dreaming of for the entire game up to that point. You can choose to splurge all your cash on one of the cheaper light type skulls, or you can choose to hold back your urge to own a skull and save up to buy one of the expensive heavy type skulls. It's a big decision at that point in the game, and it really drives home the idea of starting from scratch in this hostile alien world, working hard every day, and finally getting rewarded. The obtaining of your first purchasable scale marks not only the beginning of new combat options, but also marks your first step towards conquering this alien planet that has been a completely dominant force thus far. The economy of this game is really brilliant and makes every reward feel truly well earned. And lastly, I wish to speak about how the very act of exploring expands upon Xenoblade Chronicles X's core themes. The planet Mira is a character in and of itself. It's not only an antagonistic force which pushes back against humanity at every turn, but also a beautiful wonderland that acts as humanity's last hope. Both of these qualities are elegantly shown in the game's exploration, and the way this is done is by making the environment stunningly gorgeous as well as extremely dangerous. Powerful indigents lurk about, forcing detours to reach a destination. They hide in plain sight waiting to attack, they'll hunt you down if you try to run, and enemy strongholds filled with enemies are everywhere. All of this lends to the themes of desperation and survival so prevalent in the game. You're the weak one in this mysterious alien world and you must gain strength to overcome it. There's a very strong element of danger and exploration present for hours upon hours in the game, and I love that. The game could have only bothered to present this struggle and desperation against the harsh environment and enemy forces only in its story and narrative and slacked off in creating a world that actually feels hostile to the player, like so many open world games do. But it doesn't settle for that. The world of Xenoblade Chronicles X is in many ways similar to that of the original Exploration King, The Legend of Zelda, which lured its overworld with numerous enemies to overcome, but also lured its overworld with secrets galore. You see, this delicate balance between danger and secrets is what The Legend of Zelda and Xenoblade Chronicles X understood. That balance creates a very natural desire to explore and see what else there is to be found despite the danger that could be there. That balance also happens to coincide with the idea that the player is trailblazing for humanity's future with every step into aggressive uncharted territory on Mira. And as you progress through the game, getting better equipment and such, foes that were much too powerful to be bested initially and represented your weakness on this alien planet will fall like flies. Your ever-growing knowledge of the planet through your own exploration lets you finally get a handle of the world of Mira when you yourself have conquered all it has to offer. The sense of empowerment when you get a dominant grip on this world, which has previously been a dominant force the entire time, plays right into the theme of hope in the face of despair, which the game is focused on heavily throughout. It really is quite amazing. Xenoblade Chronicles X is a game that impressively makes all its components tie back into one another in some fashion. Even its light multiplayer offering ties back into the idea of Crossroads and camaraderie that I spoke of earlier, with other players around the world helping one another communally and squad tasks. It really is stupendous work from Monolith Soft that very few games of this scale can match. But anyway, Xenoblade Chronicles X is a fascinating game. It doesn't have the grandiose story or the charming cast of main characters of its excellent predecessor Xenoblade Chronicles, and if you come in wanting that, you might be disappointed like I initially was. But if you dig in deeper, you'll find that Xenoblade Chronicles X is a revolutionary JRPG that is every bit as great as its predecessor because of its fleshed out side activities, intricate battle system, superb world building, and addictive exploration. Creator of the Xeno series, Tetsuya Takahashi once said in an interview with the late Nintendo president Satoru Iwata that this game was a crystallization of the blood and tears of Monolith Soft. And after seeing the sheer depth of this game and the thought put into every single aspect, I believe him wholeheartedly.